Non-religious people who are anti-abortion. Why? Story 1. I am not religious. I am morally against abortion for non-medical reasons, because I believe it is a tragedy. It is a life that could have been, but was snuffed out before it ever had a chance. If it is deemed medically necessary to preserve the life of the mother, that is a different matter. However, I am legally pro-choice because I do not believe anyone has the right to another person's body, even if they need that body in order to survive. It is entirely reasonable to have a moral opinion and a legal opinion that oppose each other. This simply means you understand that your personal morality should not dictate what others can and cannot do. This is something I feel has been largely lost in public discourse, the ability to embrace nuance. To say, I don't like X, but I understand that my personal views do not, and should not, constitute law. Instead, we need to examine the deeper issues and decide whether a law is truly necessary or if it should be left to the individual. In almost all cases, I believe such matters should be left to the individual. Story 2. I know not many people will see this because the post is pretty old, but I just want to get this off my mind. I also want to preface this by saying that I'm very pro-choice. It's crazy to me that both sides pretend not to understand each other and try to turn this into a religious debate. To me, the actual argument is incredibly simple. Let me explain. I hope both sides can agree that abortion should not be allowed after birth. Why? Because that would be murder. You killed a person. So, the real question is, when does it become a person? That's a difficult thing to pinpoint, which is why people have different opinions. But you don't have to be religious to believe that some abortions should be considered murder. People who are pro-life generally believe that the fetus is alive and that killing it is murder. This belief does not have to be rooted in religion. People who are pro-choice either believe that the rights of the mother outweigh the rights of the fetus or do not believe the fetus is alive enough to have rights. Please let me know if any of this doesn't make sense. Story 3. Is there no middle ground in this debate? Do we have to be either completely for or against it? Does it have to be an us versus them issue? I don't like that, and I don't accept it. Both sides have valid points. Personally, I strongly support the freedom to choose while also being against the normalization of abortion to the point where people become reckless, as they often do with other things. I would never want to see a tweet like, "Preggers, we didn't have condoms, lol, oops." Reply, "Oh no big deal, just get an abortion. You can get one anywhere, and they're practically free." I also wouldn't want a situation where, over time, abortion is legally extended to later and later stages, up to the point of birth, or even worse. A politician once said, safe, legal, and rare. That's where I stand. It should be available, medically safe, and free from harassment, whether from protesters outside clinics or deceptive crisis pregnancy centers that lure women in just to guilt trip them, which, by the way, actually exist. But rare, in the sense that society should never treat it casually, like it's just another errand on a shopping trip. Story 4. I believe there should be a window for elective abortions, a broader window for specific cases, and then a point at which abortion is no longer allowed. I'm not sure whether this would be considered anti-abortion or not. You might call it limited choice or a middle ground position. Most Americans hold this view, and nearly all legislatures establish some form of cutoff, as did Roe v. Wade. Yet, in the media, this balanced perspective is rarely voiced. The conversation is dominated by extremes or by arguments about how wrong the other side is. My position is based on the simple idea that a developing fetus has moral value, which must be weighed against the autonomy of the pregnant woman. A fetus progressively develops into a newborn, and at some point, it becomes necessary to determine when it should be considered a human being with a right to life. Most pro-lifers draw the line at conception. Most pro-choicers act as if the line is at birth or that it never needs to be drawn. However, the line should probably fall somewhere in the middle, with certain key developmental milestones taken into account. For instance, sustained brain activity begins around 20 weeks. That may be the most reasonable point to define when life begins, and, consequently, when the cutoff for elective abortions should be. In short, there are two conflicting values at play, both of which matter, and any ethical position must consider both. Story 5. I believe 3 things to be true. All people have the fundamental right not to be killed unless they put someone else in clear danger of losing their life. Parents have a legal obligation to protect their children to the best of their abilities. Life and personhood begin at conception. At some point, you have to draw a line as to when someone becomes a person, and I believe conception is the most logically sound place to do so. Birth isn't a logical marker, as the only difference between a newborn and a fetus at 9 months is geographic location. Defining personhood and access to fundamental human rights based on location is clearly flawed. While defining personhood by the presence of a functional brain or a beating heart is certainly more justifiable than conception, neither the brain nor the heart is what makes someone human. What makes a person human is their unique sequence of DNA, which is created at the moment of conception. Believing in these 3 principles leads me to the logical conclusion that I must oppose abortion in all cases where the mother's life is not at risk. I wish I didn't believe this because I dislike the idea of government enforcement on this matter, and I recognize that access to abortion would likely be a net positive for society. However, if I accept these 3 principles as true, which I do, then it would be morally unacceptable for me to consider abortions performed for convenience to be justifiable. Story 6. A baby's heart starts beating 4 weeks after conception, and most women don't even know they're pregnant until after 3 weeks. Pregnancies resulting from rape and incest, combined with those that threaten the mother's life, make up less than 1% of all unwanted pregnancies. I have a very objective view of what constitutes human life. Some may agree, while most may not. But I firmly believe that no human should have control over another human's ability to live or die. That's simply it. I do understand the situations where abortion may be practical or medically safer for the mother. There are cases where it may even be financially necessary for the survival of the mother and her family. It's not an easy topic, and the gray areas make it incredibly difficult to determine when exceptions should be made. Because of this, I don't believe that anyone who goes through the extremely difficult process of deciding to have an abortion should be immediately condemned as objectively wrong. Ideally, we wouldn't need abortions, and therefore, they would never happen. Comprehensive sex education and safe sex practices go a long way in preventing unwanted pregnancies. Ironically, the areas that restrict access to this essential education tend to have the highest abortion rates, despite also being the most anti-abortion regions, at least in the US. Story 7. I'm still planning to read more about bioethicists' analysis of this subject, so my opinion may change. For now, though, the my body, my choice argument from pro-choicers seems hypocritical to me. If we were talking about a tumor, a kidney, or a faulty appendix, that would be one thing. But there's another human being involved. It's not just your body. What about the fetus body? They are completely helpless, and that doesn't seem fair to me. The fact that someone else is in there, without being given a choice, automatically makes the my body, my choice argument invalid in my view. As for the idea that fetuses aren't fully developed human beings yet, young children, ages 0 to 9, for example, also aren't 100% developed. They haven't reached their final stage of growth, such as puberty. Yet, most of humanity considers it wrong to kill them. Not being fully developed isn't a justification for ending the life of something that has inherent value and potential. These are just some of my reasons. I have other arguments, but these 2 are the biggest factors in my opposition to abortion. That said, I do believe abortion clinics should exist and hospitals should offer them, but only for cases of rape and medical emergencies, though my support for rape exceptions is somewhat tentative. Story 8. There are plenty of arguments in this thread about midway restrictions related to viability and similar factors. I generally agree with these because the pro-choice idea that it's murder the moment a baby is out of the womb, but not a day before seems just as nonsensical to me as the pro-life claim that life begins at conception. A midway solution would, of course, still have an arbitrary deadline, but at least it would exist in a more nuanced gray area. Such a compromise would also acknowledge the concerns of both extremes, ensuring that their voices are heard in the discussion. The main point I want to make is to encourage readers of this thread to examine their own views critically and recognize, if applicable, how they may have been pushed toward extremes by political or religious groups with their own agendas. The reality is that polarization in the American two-party system is accelerating at an unprecedented pace in the post-Trump era. As this polarization increases, political parties have less and less incentive to give ground, i.e., compromise, because they treat politics as a zero-sum game, where one side wins and the other loses, rather than as a means to create effective laws. This mindset isn't just limited to politicians. It extends to many party-backed activist groups and movements, including both pro-choice and pro-life organizations. I'm a registered Democrat, but I refuse to accept the simplistic, binary narratives that both sides push. Form your own opinions, people. Story 9. I am pro-life, though I understand that many here will insist I'm anti-choice. I have many friends and family members who disagree with me, and I understand why. I really do. But morally, abortion feels wrong to me. That may not be enough for others, but it is enough for me. I believe that a fetus is a person. Pro-choice individuals compare it to a parasite, but it isn't. It's a baby. No matter how many comparisons are made, it will always be a person. It's not cancer, and in most cases, it isn't deadly. In situations where the mother's life is at risk, I don't support abortion either. Trading one life for another doesn't feel right to me. It is a human child. When a mother wants the baby, it is treated as a baby. Parents give it a name, buy it gifts before it is even born, and set up a room in anticipation. But when the pregnancy is unintended, suddenly, it's a fetus. That distinction seems to exist solely based on the mother's opinion, and I don't believe that a person's right to life should be dictated by someone else's personal feelings. As for cases of non-consensual conception, I don't have a perfect answer. I recognize that this is an incredibly difficult and painful situation. However, many studies have examined why women seek abortions when it was legal, and a relatively small percentage were due to sexual assault. Even if we account for unreported cases, I don't believe those numbers justify granting the right to abortion in all cases. Perhaps there should be exceptions, but I am unsure where I stand on this specific issue. I also see many pro-choice arguments that don't make sense to me. For example, women are going to get abortions anyway, so making it illegal just makes it more dangerous. But by that logic, should we legalize theft just because people will steal anyway and might get hurt doing it illegally? That argument doesn't seem solid to me. Then there's the issue of personal responsibility. People create the baby, and for me, avoiding pregnancy doesn't seem that difficult. People have self-control. If a couple willingly engages in sex, both parties are responsible. If you really want to be intimate with someone, there are other options that don't create the risk of an unwanted pregnancy. If having a baby would ruin your life, something I often hear from pro-choice advocates, then why take the risk? And this responsibility applies to men as well. It shouldn't all fall on the woman. I don't support abortion, but I do support better sex education, better access to contraceptives, more research into birth control options for both men and women, and improvements to the foster care system. I don't want unwanted babies. I want all children to be wanted, but I don't believe ending a life is the answer. It's like putting a bandage on a bullet wound, like putting on a bulletproof vest instead of removing the bullets from the gun. It doesn't solve the root problem. I know many people might respond to this, and I'm open to discussion, but I won't reply if all someone does is insult me and my beliefs. Story 10. By non-religious. I assume OP is referring to people who don't practice their faith within an organized religion. However, even non-religious people hold beliefs. At the core of my belief system is the idea that human life is the most valuable thing in existence. A natural extension of that belief is that killing people is wrong. There are exceptions to this principle, and for a long time, abortion was one of those exceptions for me. But after deeply reflecting, writing my thoughts down, and reconsidering my stance, I had a change of heart. There were several pro-life arguments I struggled to counter, but one simple argument ultimately changed my mind. If killing a 1-year-old baby is immoral, then killing a newborn is immoral. If killing a newborn is immoral, then killing a 9-month-old fetus is immoral. If killing a 9-month-old fetus is immoral, then killing an 8-month-old fetus is immoral, and so on. Where do you draw the line and say that abortion becomes immoral? Take that point and subtract 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute, or even 1 second. When you determine the stage in pregnancy where you believe abortion becomes immoral, ask yourself why you think it's immoral at that point. Write down your reasoning. Do those same arguments not apply to an earlier stage of pregnancy? That depends on what you mean by anti-abortion. Any moral framework that values human life inherently implies that abortion is wrong. I'm tired of people pretending that's not the case. In this sense, since I value human life, I view abortion as murder. However, it's a form of murder that can be the lesser of two evils in many situations. Given that artificial wombs don't exist yet, and assuming a pragmatic moral framework that doesn't presume human life is infinitely valuable. The concept of the sanctity of human life is highly idealistic, and it's not exclusive to religion. While it's a useful principle for motivating technological advancements like artificial wombs, it's not a workable reality with our current technology, and the legal system should reflect that. Here's where I stand on the issue. Believing abortion should be completely outlawed is purely moral legislation. It's unrealistic and often delusional. It's always worth it to have a baby, says the person who won't have to deal with it. Believing abortion should only be allowed in select, special cases is understandable, though somewhat arbitrary. Believing abortion should generally be legal, but treated as the lesser evil is my position. Believing abortion should be government-funded is either delusional, it's totally not a human yet, or psychopathic, let's murder some babies. This one is simple. It comes down to understanding where your moral authority begins and ends, as well as recognizing the relationship between choices and responsibility for those choices. Zygotes formed through a willing act of procreation, meaning two individuals engaged in consensual sex, exist because of a conscious choice made with the understanding that pregnancy is a possible outcome. We do not have moral authority over another person's life. That is, we do not have the lawful right to decide that someone must die for any reason. Therefore, if a life is created through willing acts, undertaken with the knowledge that such creation is possible, we must also acknowledge that we had complete control over whether or not to create that life. We have the moral authority to create life, but we do not have the moral authority to end it. Common responses. We do have the moral authority to end life. For example, we grant it to police and the legal system. Response. Police are never instructed to take a life unless another life is in immediate danger. They are empowered to make decisions in situations where life is being taken or is seriously threatened, but their primary directive is to de-escalate whenever possible. Outside of those extreme circumstances, they are not given the right to decide who lives and who dies. B. We execute egregious criminals through the death penalty. Response. If a person does not have the moral authority to kill, then a society that grants the government that authority is equally culpable. This is why many countries have banned the death penalty. Just because something is legal does not mean it is moral. C. What about cases where zygotes are formed unwillingly, such as through rape? Response. Although abortions resulting from rape account for a tiny fraction, 0.1%, of all cases, these situations involve an unwilling creation of life. Some might argue that because the creation was not consensual, the life itself is invalid. However, the fact that a zygote was conceived through rape does not eliminate our moral obligation not to kill, even those conceived without consent. This is a complex issue with no easy answer. But given that the overwhelming majority of abortions involve willingly created pregnancies, it does not justify a broad exception that grants widespread moral authority over life and death. If more than half of abortions occurred under these circumstances, I could acknowledge that abortion might have some legal merit. However, given the data we have, these cases are rare, and in such situations, the decision should ultimately be left to the mother. Story 11. My ex-girlfriend and I once talked about what we would do if she became pregnant, and I was surprised when she said she would probably keep the child. I was surprised because she is pro-choice, and we were in no position to raise a child financially. We were both traveling frequently for our education and weren't even sure if we would end up in the same country for work. Her reasoning was that, in Denmark, where she's from, abortion is often presented by doctors and educators as a simple and easy procedure, without much discussion about the emotional and physical impact. She felt she couldn't handle the idea of losing a life growing inside her, especially after witnessing the emotional toll multiple miscarriages had on her mother. Maybe this doesn't directly answer the question, but I think it's important to recognize that being pro-choice doesn't mean abortion is the right choice for every individual. That's something I fully support. We never reached an agreement on what we would do if we found out that a child we conceived had a severe disability that could be screened for during pregnancy. one that would significantly impair their quality of life. Sometimes, there just isn't a clear right answer. Story 12. Abortions are warranted under extreme circumstances, such as pregnancies resulting from rape or cases where there is a high likelihood of severe birth defects that would lead to a very difficult life for the child. The issue arises when abortion is used as a last-ditch effort to avoid having a child. There are numerous ways to prevent unwanted pregnancies, and when people choose to ignore those options, resorting to abortion as an escape from the consequences of their actions feels unnatural and irresponsible. Regarding Roe v. Wade, the responsibility of ensuring the right to an abortion does not lie at the federal level, as it is not explicitly protected by the Constitution. Instead, this responsibility falls to individual states, allowing them to make their own decisions. Each state elects representatives who enact laws that reflect the values of their constituents. No state is obligated to align with another state's stance on this issue, and that decentralized approach is the fairest way to handle it. Additionally, using abortion as a fallback for pregnancies resulting from negligent, casual sex is symptomatic of a larger societal issue, one that reflects a growing disregard for personal responsibility and a belief that people can act however they want without consequences. Over time, as people mature, they often gain a deeper appreciation for the sanctity of life, both before and after birth. Story 13. I am religious, and I am pro-choice. I am also opposed to capital punishment. In my 60-odd trips around the sun, I have known people who have had abortions or have been close to those who have. None of them made the decision lightly. The procedure itself can be physically and emotionally difficult. The decision is often excruciating, and the aftermath is something a person carries with them for the rest of their life. Unfortunately, the debate in our society has devolved into an argument of extremes. Instead, the focus should be on reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies, supporting women who choose abortion, supporting women who choose not to abort, and ensuring the well-being of children. The idea that banning or allowing abortion would fundamentally change human behavior is absurd. What's even more baffling is that many of the same people who want to make abortion illegal also seek to restrict access to sex education and birth control. Time and again, studies have shown that access to safe and effective contraception reduces both the number of abortions and the number of unwanted pregnancies. This brings me to my final point. Our policies should be based on solid evidence, not on subjective opinions about what should or should not be. Story 14. I consider myself agnostic, and honestly, a baby is still a life. Some people argue that it isn't, that it's just a parasite, but it's a living human being. I don't think people should get abortions, but I also don't think they should be banned. That said, if someone chooses to have an abortion, it should be done within the first few weeks. The risk of complications for the woman is lower, and at that stage, the baby cannot feel pain. People say abortion is always safe, but that's not entirely true. Some women experience serious complications, and in some cases, they may lose the ability to have children in the future. If someone is carrying a baby and doesn't want to raise it, adoption is always an option for couples who are unable to have children. And another thing, if someone knowingly has unprotected sex, fully aware of the possible consequences, they need to take responsibility for their choices. This isn't about religion. It's about understanding cause and effect. If you know the risks but choose to take them anyway, there's a lesson to be learned. However, in cases of rape and similar situations, I do believe the person should have the choice to get an abortion. The father should also have a say in the matter. If he wants the baby, both parents need to be on board with the responsibility. If he wants the baby but the mother doesn't, that's a tough situation, and I don't have a clear answer. If the father doesn't want the baby but the mother does, she has every right to keep it, but she should consider the responsibilities that come with raising a child alone. This is a very controversial topic, and I have mixed feelings about it. I don't believe abortion should be completely banned, mainly because people who seek one should be able to do so safely without risking serious harm or even death. There are many scenarios I haven't mentioned, and people can certainly argue different perspectives. I believe in bodily autonomy, but not in the idea that a woman should be able to terminate a pregnancy just because she wants to, especially not past a certain point where the baby can feel pain. Of course, all of this is without bringing religion into the discussion, since this debate ultimately comes down to personal opinions and beliefs. But anyway, That's my take on it. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.